They didn't take us seriously at first. The Galactic Concord, thousands of species, millions of systems, all connected under a single bloated banner, watched us with the same arrogant amusement you'd give a flea trying to fight a wolf. Their envoy's exact words were burned into my memory. Humanity still uses kinetic projectiles. How quaint. I remember how they chuckled in that smug, condescending tone, as if our weapons were museum artifacts. That was before ships started disappearing, before cruisers blinked out of existence without distress signals, before the vacuum filled with the twisted remains of fleets that had once sneered at Earth. It all started near the edge of the Erebos expanse, a region so empty most empires never bothered to patrol it. We called it the Graveyard Stretch, not because of what was there, but because of what we'd put there. I was stationed on Vanguard Station, Earth's oldest deep space defense array. To the Concord, it looked like a rusted relic with outdated tech and no warp gates. What they didn't see was the arsenal buried underneath. What they didn't know was that humans had stopped developing faster-than-light weapons and started developing faster-than-light targeting. That was our trick. Not speed, not fancy plasma beams or quantum phase disruptors. Just mass, accelerated to unholy velocities. The Railguns, God, the sound they made. You couldn't hear it in space, obviously, but inside the loading bays, the vibrations sang through your bones like death's drumbeat. We didn't name our guns after saints or heroes. We named them after what they did. Crackjaw, Bonehook, Silence Bringer. Each one loaded with 10-ton slugs, magnetically launched at targets half a light minute away with the precision of a surgeon and the rage of a butcher. The Concord said it was inefficient, said it was barbaric. And then their scout ship, the Verity's wing, disappeared. Not exploded, not attacked. Just vanished. No wreckage. No beacon. 1 second it was broadcasting lightwave telemetry, and the next it was gone. They thought it was a malfunction, a technical glitch. So they sent a destroyer, then a fleet, then a full-blown exploratory armada. And that's when we pulled the trigger. The fleet came in slow, cautious, trying to establish communication. We gave them none, not out of malice, just protocol. We never opened fire first, but when the GCC Blade of Truth drifted within firing range of Crackjaw's corridor, something happened. Some hothead in their command chain powered up a plasma battery, didn't even fire it, just lit it. That was enough. We don't warn, we don't broadcast intent, we just erase. I watched from the control deck as the slug hit them. No flash, no cinematic explosion, just force, brutal and silent. The Blade of Truth folded inward, like it had been hit by the fist of God. It didn't explode, it imploded, crumpling like paper, its midsection crushed into a glowing knot of debris. 1 shot, 1 kill. A vessel with 18,000 conquered crew on board. Gone. They never found bodies. Over the next 72 hours, 6 more ships entered that zone. Not one made it back. All gone. We kept firing. Not out of hate, but necessity. They kept coming. We kept sending them back to their maker in silence. And then the transmissions stopped. Concord Command went quiet. No more search parties, no more diplomacy, just silence. That's when it hit us. They weren't regrouping. They weren't planning retaliation. They were afraid. They didn't understand the tech, couldn't detect our systems. Our railguns were invisible to their sensors, buried under ice and rock, camouflaged in dead signals and fake radiation spikes. To them we were ghosts with metal fists. And now the galaxy started whispering. Something lives in the Erebos expanse, something that kills without warning. Not bad for a species they mocked as primitive. Not bad for a species that never left home without a railgun. We didn't celebrate. Even after the Blade of Truth was turned into scrap, and the other 6 vanished without a trace, no one on Vanguard Station smiled. There was no cheering in the comms room, no raised glasses in the mess. Just silence. Focus. Tension like a steel cable ready to snap. Because we knew what was coming next. The Conquered wasn't just a coalition. It was a machine, slow, calculating, and merciless once provoked. And make no mistake, we had provoked them. Not with words or politics, but with bodies. Their fleet was elite. Their commanders had never tasted defeat. And now they'd tasted humiliation. That was a flavor no empire swallowed quietly. I stood by the forward viewport, watching the black stretch of space beyond our hull. It looked calm, peaceful. That's the thing about space. It always hides the war just beneath the surface. I sipped cold coffee, listening to the hum of the station's core reactor deep below. It was the only sound I could tolerate lately. "Command wants confirmation," barked Sergeant Decker from across the control deck. His voice was gravel and whiskey. Orbital Watch picked up another warp signature. Big one, heavy tonnage. My hands tightened around the cup. Class? Conquered Leviathan, long-range dreadnought, carrier capability, full war support. I nodded, not surprised. Just one? He looked up, eyes dark. For now. That was the way they played it. They'd send one hammer first, let it test the nail, let it break the ground. Only when it failed would they unleash hell. I walked over to the console and brought up the satellite array. The ship was still out of railgun range, drifting at the outer edge of the expanse. Smart, observing, recording, trying to figure out why ships kept dying here. They'd figure it out soon. They'd see the pattern. The disappearances were too precise to be coincidence. No radiation, no heat signatures, no missile locks. Just mass, pure, focused force, ripping through alloy and flesh at 30 kilometers a second. That's what railguns are. No fire, no show. Just the truth. We prepped Crackjaw and Bonehook again, their cores humming beneath miles of reinforced plating. Each reload was a ritual. Slug loaded, magnetic rails tested, aiming systems recalibrated for gravitational drift. Our targeting AI didn't care about politics. It only saw trajectories and kill percentages. But this ship, this was different. Dreadnoughts weren't scouts. They weren't expendable. The Conquered didn't send them lightly, which meant this wasn't a test. It was a message. "What do you think they're waiting for?" Decker asked, lighting a smoke. He wasn't supposed to. Oxygen rationing was tight, but no one stopped him. The man had lost 2 sons during the Europa evacuation. He earned his smokes. "They're watching, trying to bait us," I said. "They want us to fire first again. Get us on their media streams, make us look like aggressors." "Like we haven't been?" I didn't answer. Because he was right. In their eyes, we were the monsters now, the primitives who didn't play by the rules, the cavemen with oversized weapons and a grudge against the stars. But they never asked why we built them in the first place. Back before the Conquered discovered us, we reached beyond Mars with nothing but scrap ships and stubbornness. And the moment we started colonizing, the first thing they did was impose a tech compliance treaty. Fancy way of saying, you get lasers, we get railguns, unless you want to be dismantled. We refused. So they sanctioned us, blockaded us, left outposts like Titan and Callisto to rot. And when food ran dry, they broadcast propaganda about how humanity needs supervision. Like we were animals they had to tame. We remembered that. We remembered Europa, when 3 Concorde frigates accidentally opened fire on civilian habitats and called it a sensor miscalibration. We buried the children they killed in ice, and now they wondered why our guns had no mercy. The Leviathan crept forward, just a few kilometers closer. That was all we needed. Bonehook's AI locked in, targeting matrix complete. I watched the screen blink green. Decker took a long drag, exhaled slow. Orders. I hesitated. Because this time, this shot wouldn't erase a scout. It would start a war, but maybe that war already started the moment they thought we were too backward to fight back. I gave the nod. Fire! The slug fired with no fanfare, no screaming sirens, no countdown, just a soft vibration through the deck. Barely noticeable. If you weren't looking at the screens, you'd have missed it. But we were watching. Every eye on that deck was locked to the monitors, watching the arc of Bonehook's payload as it cut across the void like the silent judgment of a vengeful god. The Leviathan didn't move. Maybe they thought we wouldn't dare. Maybe they assumed no one would be crazy enough to fire on a dreadnought from a backwater planet that hadn't even unlocked true faster-than-light propulsion. Maybe they thought wrong. The impact hit the Leviathan mid-spine, just behind the fusion core but before the auxiliary shielding. That's the sweet spot, where the armor's still thick, but the ship's nervous system runs through like a spine. The slug tore through 30 meters of alloy, slicing the thermal relays and power grid before exiting out the side like it was made of butter. No explosion, no flames. But the ship died. Its lights winked out section by section, like a beast bleeding from the inside. Engine trails stuttered. The communication array turned to debris. No escape pods launched, no counterfire. Just silence. For something that size, silence is terrifying. The control room went even quieter than usual. Decker stood up slowly, his cigarette burning down between two fingers he didn't seem to notice. Did we just... I nodded. One shot. And now one of the most advanced ships in the galaxy was bleeding sparks into the void. It took 15 minutes before the Concorde responded. They didn't send a fleet. They didn't open fire. They broadcasted. A message blinked through all frequencies, aimed at every human listening post and vessel in the system. We patched it into the main screen, and I braced myself for demands, threats, maybe a declaration of war. Instead, a face, one of theirs. Reptilian skin, long bony horns curling behind a narrow skull. Voice like broken glass sliding over a violin. You have violated Galactic Protocol Section 9 Alpha, unauthorized military engagement against conquered vessels. By order of the Council, Earth's sovereignty is hereby revoked. You will surrender all orbital stations, weapon arrays, and colonies immediately. The voice paused, eyes narrowing. If you do not comply, you will be eradicated. No emotion, no drama, just cold bureaucratic extinction. They thought they still had the upper hand. I leaned forward, pressing the transmission key. No, I said, just that one word. No preamble, no explanation, no apology. Then I cut the line. Decker stared at me like I'd just punched a god in the face. Christ, you just declared war. No, I said again. They did that when they killed Europa. We're just finally answering. Vanguard Station hummed with renewed energy. Technicians sprinted to battle stations. The other railguns came online. Crackjaw, Silence Bringer, Widow's Tongue. 3 more hidden arrays, Atlas, Gorgon, and Bastard's Grin, checked in from deep orbit. Each one had been buried in silence for years. Waiting. Ready. Humanity didn't build an army. We built a trap. While the Concorde was busy laughing at our primitive weapons, we were carving kill zones into every dead moon we could reach. We were embedding rail batteries into asteroids, hiding ammo depots in comets, camouflaging power stations inside ancient mining rigs. We didn't want war, but if they brought it, we wanted to make sure they'd never forget us. I stood on the deck as Decker barked out coordinates to the rest of the grid. Target lock on next Leviathan class, prep firing solutions. We had no alliances, no interstellar navy, but we had velocity, precision, rage, and we had nothing to lose. The Concorde struck back 2 days later, not with one ship, not with a fleet. They brought a siege column, 37 ships, 3 dreadnoughts, 10 destroyers, multiple escort craft, all riding in a wall formation that stretched across a third of the Erebos expanse. They moved like a machine, slow, deliberate, impenetrable. No messages, no negotiations. This wasn't diplomacy anymore. This was extermination. I stood in Vanguard's main control hall, arms crossed, watching as the telemetry poured in. Red icons spread across the screen like blood in water. It was almost beautiful, in a cold, mathematical way. They thought numbers would crush us, thought size equaled strength, thought that now, with their shiny fleets and clean doctrines, they'd finally wipe out the human problem. Decker stood beside me, jaw tight. You thinking what I'm thinking? I'm thinking they brought enough ships to make it hurt. He grunted. Then they're about to learn what pain really feels like. We didn't have 37 ships. We had 37 railguns, each one buried, silent, disguised under layers of rock, ice, metal, and heat shielding. Every slug we fired cost more than we could afford. Every hit needed to count. This wasn't a battle we were meant to win. This was a lesson we needed to teach. The first volley came at 0400 station time. They didn't fire at us directly. They targeted Titan Base, a backup station we'd abandoned years ago, or so they thought. All they saw was the heat signature. They didn't know we'd left a surprise there. As their plasma rounds hit the surface and shattered the old dome, the ice cracked open, and so did the trap. From beneath Titan's crust, Widow's tongue came online. The slug launched straight up through the ice like the fist of hell. It struck the forward destroyer right in the underbelly, where the shielding was weakest. The impact didn't just pierce, it shattered the ship's spine. Hull plating twisted, engines sheared apart, and what remained of its crew were scattered into space. That was the first kill. Within seconds, Atlas and Gorgon joined the fray. The second wave of slugs hit in perfect sequence. The Concord formation, once so tight and ordered, started to fracture. Ships scrambled to reposition. Shield arrays overlapped. Orders screamed across open channels. But they didn't realize it wasn't just about the guns. It was about where we hit them. Each shot had been pre-calculated for years. We knew how their engines were arranged, where the power cores were housed, which sections could survive impact, and which would rupture like paper. While they relied on AIs and predictive matrices, we relied on rage-fueled memory. Every engineer who lost someone on Europa knew exactly where to aim. By the 10th minute of combat, 7 Concorde ships were gone. Not disabled. Not damaged. Gone. Then came their retaliation. A destroyer finally pinpointed Widow's tongue. Plasma lances fired in a burst, scorching through Titan's crust. The railgun station didn't stand a chance. She burned from the inside out, the ice around her flash melting into clouds of vapor. The crew never made it out. Decker stared at the explosion and didn't say a word. Just walked over to his console and recalibrated Bonehook for a return strike. His face was pale, hard, unreadable. They took tongue. He muttered. Time to take something back. We locked Bonehook onto one of their carriers. It was a floating fortress, crawling with fighter drones and guided warheads. If it launched even half of them, our grid would be overrun. So we didn't wait. Bonehook's core overloaded slightly. Too much energy in too little time. But the slug fired. It hit the carrier dead center, slicing the hangar bay open like a rotten fruit. The vacuum did the rest. One moment, hundreds of fighters were prepping for launch. The next, they were gone. Sucked into the abyss with half the crew. Screams echoed across their comm channels. Not commands, not strategy, just panic. Their line broke. Ships collided in retreat. Orders turned into chaos. That's when I realized something that chilled me to the bone. They weren't scared of our weapons. They were scared of us, of how quiet we were, of how we never negotiated, never asked for mercy, never bragged. We just kept firing. And in that moment, for the first time in the history of their great empire, the Concorde was afraid. The Concorde changed tactics. They always do, eventually. That's what makes them dangerous. You think you've seen their best, then they show you the thing they were saving. Not out of strategy, but out of arrogance, because they believed they wouldn't need it. Not for us. And when they finally did, that meant they were desperate. It started with the signal disruption. Our arrays picked up strange pulses, faint, erratic, almost like static. The kind of noise you'd write off as solar interference. But it wasn't solar. It was synthetic, intentional. We lost contact with Atlas first, then Bastard's Grin. Both stations went offline without warning, no explosion, no attack, no time to respond. Just dead screens and silence, no mayday calls, just emptiness. EMP, Decker asked, pacing behind me. I shook my head. Too focused, too surgical. He squinted at the blank feed. Something got inside. That idea hit like a punch to the chest. We hadn't considered infiltration. Why would we? We were kilometers deep in ice and steel. No warp gates, no atmosphere, just sealed concrete and hatred. But that's the thing about the Concorde. They don't win with brute force. They win by corrupting. Our answer came an hour later, when a survivor made it to comms from Bastard's Grin. One of the junior techs, barely more than a kid. Face white with frostbite, blood caked to his temple. "They're inside," he said, voice cracked. "Not soldiers, not drones, something else." "What?" I demanded. "What did you see?" His eyes darted like he wasn't sure he wanted to remember. They weren't. Whole. Like something took them, our crew, and turned them into copies. Skin wasn't right. Eyes were empty. They were cold. And they didn't bleed. That's when we knew. The Concorde had unleashed something we didn't even know existed. Biosynthetic infiltrators, living weapons, not robots, not clones. Something worse, something between, built from their genetics, shaped to mimic, programmed to replace. They weren't here to fight. They were here to be us. They'd sent them into the outer stations, not to destroy, but to assume control, to turn our own weapons against us. One by one, in silence, with no alarms, no warnings. It was a quiet invasion. "Shut down all outbound command links," I barked. "Manual only. No remote access." "But I know what it'll do," I snapped. "Do it anyway. I don't care if we have to pull fuses by hand. No more trust, not even in ourselves." It was brutal, slowed everything to a crawl, but it kept our last stations safe. The rest, gone, infiltrated or compromised. We'd never know which. Didn't matter. They were lost. Decker slammed a fist on the console. "They can't win this way. They can't sneak their way to victory." "Yes, they can," I said, "and they will, unless we burn it all first." We initiated Scorched Ice Protocol, a last resort we'd buried in the command scripts years ago. If any station was compromised, the rest would detonate their local fuel cores. Take out the infrastructure, deny the enemy the prize, leave nothing. The Concorde wouldn't get to use our weapons. They'd get ashes. The explosion that followed tore a crater into the side of Callisto that could be seen from orbit. Gorgon Station went up in silence, but its death took 3 Concorde cruisers with it. The rest backed off immediately. They thought they could play the long game. They thought humanity was too fragile to make hard decisions. They thought wrong. I looked out into the black once more, my throat dry, rage burning under the surface. "They're not just trying to wipe us out," Decker muttered. I turned to him. "They're trying to erase the idea of us." That's when I understood. This wasn't about territory. It wasn't about resources. It was about control. The conquered needed the galaxy to believe they were untouchable. That defiance ended in annihilation. But we had done more than survive. We'd fought back, and worse. We'd won battles. That made us dangerous, not because of our guns, but because we gave others hope. And that's something they couldn't allow. So if they wanted to erase us, we'd have to become something that couldn't be erased. We'd have to become legend. The entrance to Project Scythe wasn't marked on any Earth-based navigation chart. Hell, most of our own brass didn't even know it existed. It lived beneath the Martian crust, 20 kilometers down, past abandoned tunnels and dead mining rigs. It didn't have a beacon. No communications, no surface defenses, just rock, rust, and the paranoia of a species that had been told for too long it wasn't allowed to defend itself. We didn't build it for the conquered. We built it for after the conquered. Because deep down we always knew the day would come when talking wouldn't work. When someone would push us too far, then act surprised when we pushed back. Project Scythe wasn't just a weapon. It was a philosophy. A response to every treaty that had denied us the right to protect our homes, every sanction that left colonies starving, every whisper across the galactic channels that humans were unstable, emotional, too aggressive to be trusted. So we built something that reflected exactly that. The ride down was long. No light, no sound, except the faint groan of pressure on steel as the drop chamber descended into the Martian mantle. Decker rode beside me, his face hard, lit only by the red glow of the emergency lighting. I thought this place was a myth, he said, voice low. It was, I replied, until now. When the lift doors opened, the heat hit us first. Not from magma, but from power. The entire facility thrummed with it, energy moving through superconductive rails, buried deep in the planet's bones. A skeleton made of uranium, iron, and pure human spite. The core of Scythe was a chamber bigger than any hangar I'd ever seen. Rows of machinery lined the walls, each one dormant but humming like they were asleep with one eye open. In the center sat Judgment, our last resort. A railgun, yes, but not just a slug thrower. This one didn't fire tungsten or depleted uranium. It fired compressed dark matter. 2 years ago, a rogue group of Terran physicists, exiled for violating mass manipulation laws, managed to create a microcore dense enough to simulate gravitational collapse on impact. Not enough to form a black hole, but enough to crack the spine of a planet. We weren't supposed to build it. That was the point. Can it reach? Decker asked, eyes locked on the core as we approached the control station. Anywhere in the system, I said. One shot. And what happens to Mars? I hesitated. She doesn't survive the recoil. He exhaled hard. So this is suicide. No, I said. This is closure. We didn't come down here because we still thought we could win. Not in the conventional sense. We came down here because the Concorde hadn't just crossed a line. They'd erased it. They didn't want surrender. They wanted submission. They didn't want peace. They wanted silence. And humanity was never good at staying quiet. I activated the control panel. Authorization required genetic scan, retinal match, and a neural ping from the implants the top brass said didn't exist. One by one, it all clicked into place. The interface pulsed green. Targeting data flooded the screen. Concorde's capital station, High Nest, sat 3 light minutes from Saturn orbit, surrounded by shields, defended by enough fleets to crush Earth twice over. But none of that mattered, because Judgment didn't ask permission. You sure about this? Decker asked, his hand resting on the emergency override. I'm sure they'll never expect it. The final targeting sequence began. The chamber around us roared to life, lights flashing red, temperature rising. Cooling systems strained, the rails began to glow. It was like standing in the center of a nuclear god's heartbeat. Then came the voice, conquered transmission, crackling into life across every human frequency. Stand down, this is your last warning. Lay down your weapons or be purged. I looked up toward the comm unit. You already purged us. I whispered. Now it's our turn. I pressed fire. The chamber shook. The rail screamed. And the payload launched. No streak of light, no explosion, just a sudden absence of mass as the slug vanished into space. 3 minutes later, the Concorde's capital station, 20 kilometers long, 5 across, folded in on itself like wet paper. There was no fireball, no debris, just a new star blinking to life, then vanishing in a blink. They had erased Europa. We erased their empire. The galaxy didn't cheer. It held its breath. High Nest was more than a station. It was a symbol. The Concorde's floating throne, a monument to their control, their order, their untouchable status. The place where treaties were signed, rebellions crushed, and lesser species told their place. And now, it was gone. No wreckage, no black box, no survivors. Just a hollow spot in Saturn's orbit where light twisted wrong and gravity curled unnaturally, like space itself refused to look at what we'd done. The Concorde tried to hide it at first, claimed a power failure, then a terrorist strike, then a civilian malfunction. But you can't hide a gravitational scar the size of a continent. And once word got out, everything changed. First came the silence. Not from Earth, from them. The fleets that had filled the void above Mars started pulling back. No more transmissions, no new ultimatums. They didn't retreat. They froze. The galaxy started talking. Not in official comms, not in polished declarations. Whispers, pirate channels, fringe networks, black market traders. Rumors spread like wildfire, faster than light ever could. Did you hear what the humans did? They erased High Nest. They have a weapon the Concorde can't trace. No warning, no survivors. And most important of all, they fought back. For the first time in 1,000 years, someone had punched the Empire in the face and got away with it. And that scared them more than anything. But what shocked us more were the messages that followed. From other species, other colonies. Names we hadn't heard in years, cultures the Concorde had quietly absorbed or erased. Small voices at first, then louder, then united. One from the Varlak hegemony, a reptilian race, long enslaved under Concorde debt systems, forced to work their mining moons without pay. Their message was short. 3 words. You showed us. Another from the Umbari, hive-mind traders who had their language code rewritten by the Concorde decades ago. Their transmission came as a single symbol, the old Umbari glyph for vengeance, and then came dozens more, one by one, not alliances, not formal pacts, just signals of respect. We weren't alone anymore. They didn't love us. They didn't want our politics or our culture, but they feared us. And in the void where fear lives, respect grows. I stood in Vanguard's command deck, staring out at the black once more. But it felt different now. Not like a cage, like a frontier. Decker walked in, holding a datapad covered in pings from off-world comm boys. Something's happening, he said. More fleets? He shook his head. The opposite. Concordes pulling out of half the fringe systems. Military presence down. Diplomats fleeing. Collapse? Cracks. Not enough to fall apart yet, but the fear is working. I sat down slow, trying to let that truth settle in. For years we'd been on the back foot, choking under sanctions, treated like children with knives, and now our very existence had thrown the most powerful empire in history into hesitation, not because we outnumbered them, not because we had faster ships, but because we hit back harder than they thought possible, and we didn't flinch. What about Earth? I asked. Fallout. Decker nodded. Some. Political unrest. Pressure from the Terran Assembly to step down, disarm, apologize. I laughed once, cold and bitter. They want to apologize for surviving. He looked at me, jaw clenched. They think we embarrassed humanity. No, I said, standing again. We reminded it who we are. Out there in the deep black, something had shifted. Humanity would never be part of the Concord now. That bridge was vaporized with High Nest. But maybe we weren't supposed to fit in. Maybe we were meant to be something else. Not Empire, not rebels. Something the galaxy remembers, because when the Concord's historians write their next chapter, they'll have to include the day their gods bled, and the animals they thought they could tame tore off the leash. Peace didn't come. It never does. Not really. What we bought with blood, with dark matter and scorched moons, wasn't peace. It was space. Breathing room. A pause long enough to catch our breath before the next storm rolled in. That's how things work out here in the void. You don't win peace. You just win the right to survive a little longer. Earth was fractured. Half the Terran Assembly wanted to retreat, rebuild, keep their heads down, and pray the conquered never reformed. The other half wanted to finish the job. End the Empire for good. Burn every last symbol of their dominion into ash. Neither side understood what was really coming. Because while we were busy with politics and medals and rebuilding the railguns that survived the purge, something else moved in the dark. Something that had once worn a conquered uniform. The first reports were dismissed. Fringe colonies whispering about conquered ships without call signs, dead crews walking, signals that mimicked friendly codes but led patrols into ambushes. We assumed they were pirates, leftovers, rogue AI, but we were wrong. They weren't Concord, they weren't us, they were the inheritors, the Concord secret contingency. A splinter cell designed for one purpose, to carry the torch if the Empire ever fell, not to rebuild it, not to restore it, to replace it. We didn't know their real name at first. The message came from an Umbari scout vessel, half destroyed, barely limping into orbit near Phobos. The pilot was already dead, but the black box had one word broadcasted on loop, carved into the comm burst like a signature. Inheritors. They didn't come for diplomacy. They didn't posture or send envoys. They started hunting. First went the weaker colonies, the ones that had supported us in silence during the Erebos War. Then the Varlak outposts. Then the Umbari spires. Entire cities turned into signal ghosts, pinging for help with no answer until they went dark completely. But the worst part? They were using our weapons, not just railguns, our tactics, our hidden placement arrays, our kinetic kill zones. They were repurposing the things we built to defend ourselves and using them to mirror us, distorted, brutal, and unfeeling. Like they'd learned every lesson we taught the Concord and stripped the soul out of it. Decker stood across from me, older now, a limp in his leg from the last counter-strike on Ganymede. His face was lined with exhaustion, but the fire was still there in his eyes. They're not trying to conquer, he muttered. They're trying to erase the memory of what we did, of what we proved. They're not just after us, I said quietly. They're after the idea of us. And that's when we made the call. We gathered what was left of the old command, the grizzled bastards who'd fought in silence deep in the Erebos expanse when the world thought we were already lost. No suits, no media, just men who remembered how it felt to be prey with teeth. We brought them to the place it all started, Vanguard Station, burned, scarred, barely operational, but still standing. We didn't light the railguns that night. We didn't rally fleets. We sent a message to the inheritors, to the conquered, to the stars. It wasn't long, just 4 words, broadcast in every known frequency, every old conquered protocol, every pirate tongue and outlaw language we knew. We're still firing back. And then we waited, because we knew they'd come. And we were ready. In the end, maybe we weren't supposed to win. Maybe humans aren't here to rule or to kneel or to join the stars as equals. maybe we're just meant to be the reminder that even in a galaxy ruled by empires and lies, sometimes the ones you try to break you first.